according to the Virginia Constitution, the House of Delegates must run in new districts this year, November 2021. It's also, by the way, a requirement of the US Constitution, which says that we have to redistrict every 10 years. And the purpose of this goes way back to the founding of the Republic, 1790. The whole purpose of a census done every 10 years is that the founders said, well, we want the population to match the districts. That's how it works in the US House of Representatives. We want states that are more populous to have more votes. And that changes over time, right? So California is the most populous state in 1790. It didn't exist. So you've got to change it. And every year we go away from the census, it's a little bit wrong. And the founders decided, well, you can't do a census every year. That's really hard to do. But if we waited 50 years, then they'd get radically wrong. So we choose 10. And it gets a little wrong in year 1, more wrong in year 5, even more wrong in year 9. But by year 10, we've got to fix it. Otherwise, it would get more and more wrong, because otherwise you end up with, just to give you a sort of historical thing, the reason why that clause is there is because, of course, Britain had its parliament, and it had a number of what were called rotten boroughs. And what's a rotten borough? It's like there'd be a town and it'd be destroyed by a flood. And so the town used to have, 10,000 people, and it would get 1 seat in the House of Parliament. And then the flood would come, and everyone would leave, and there'd be 2 people left in the rotten borough. And the land would be owned maybe underwater by some absent landowner. And so that landowner got a seat in Parliament because the 2 people there were, his people. And then London, which was growing by leaps and bounds, might get only 3 seats compared to this rotten borough with only 2 people. So part of the problem under the founders saw, but also you'll see it in a number of Supreme Court rulings, is that if you want one person, one vote, which is from famous Supreme Court rulings from the 1960s, Reynolds v. Sims and Baker v. Carr, if you're a lawyer, you can look those up. But basically, we don't want it where 100,000 people get 1 representative and 2 people get another representative. That's not fair. It's one of the reasons why our United States Senate basically isn't fair, but we can't do anything about that because that unfairness is baked in the Constitution. So long story short, the US Census is required every 10 years to redistrict with regard to federal elections. So for the House of Representatives, we have to redistrict every 10 years. And that's going to happen with Virginia because the data is going to arrive on time for that. But the Virginia Constitution also requires us to redistrict every 10 years and specifically says we meaning members of the Virginia House of Delegates, must run in new districts designed in 2021 based on 2021 data in November of 2021. Now you might say, but wait, Mark, didn't we just hold June primaries in the old districts? Yes, we did. Well, is that constitutional? Well, no, it's not. But we did it. Is one thing illegal? Well, of course they were illegal. But wait, why did we do something that was clearly illegal? Well, we did something that was clearly illegal because the census broke its law in not getting us the data on time, which it's required to do by law. Now, the census had good reason for not getting us the data on time. COVID messed them up. The Trump administration really messed them up. There was a number of conflicting rulings back and forth from the Trump administration. The Biden administration disagreed with how the Trump administration did the census. And I agree with Biden, but the heart of it is the national census was a mess and is being delivered to us late. So we will get national census data on August 16th, which will give the Redistricting Commission 45 days, basically to the end of September, to draw districts, and then the General Assembly can approve them. If they disapprove, there's a whole more process, which I can get into. When the argument came on Amendment 1, I argued strenuously that its time frame was unworkable, that we could never get it done in time to meet the constitutional mandate of elections in November 2021. And all the people who support the amendment said, no, Mark, you're crazy. You're giving wild, wild theories. Of course we'll be done in time. Well, I was right. And it's not workable. And so we are expressly in violation of the Virginia Constitution right now. And we always have been, and we always knew we were. Everyone marched forward, Department of Elections, Redistricting Commission, saying, we are violating the Constitution. And we did so loudly and proudly. I think we should uphold the Constitution, but I also thought we shouldn't have Amendment 1 in the first place, which is part of what made it all unworkable. So There is a lawsuit that's been filed. It's been filed by Paul Goldman, who is sort of a lawyer gadfly. He worked in the Wilder administration 30 years ago. And he's sort of known for keeping us on our constitutional footing. And he has filed a lawsuit. Now, it probably is too late for this year. We've already had primaries. But his goal is to have us have elections in 22 and 23. Given that we're clearly violating the Constitution for 21, at least we won't violate it for more than 1 year. I myself was crucified on this whole idea that I thought we'd follow the Constitution, in that I ran for lieutenant governor and for delegate. And I was confident, because the Virginia Constitution required it, that we would not have the elections on the same day. We would do what we did in 2011 and 2001 and 91 and 81, which is have statewide in June and delegate primaries in August, September, as we've done every redistricting year as far back as anyone can remember in Virginia history. But I got tricked because we didn't follow the Constitution. And in doing so, I had 2 elections on the same day, which confused a lot of my voters. Hence, I had an unfortunate result in my primary. But the long story short is no one knew what was going to happen. There was no court action filed. It really probably should have been filed last January, February, March, April. I had encouraged people to file it, but no one was. I didn't file it because I was busy with 2 races. And frankly, we didn't find out until March 30th that they were not going to do elections this year, even though people had signed up to get on the ballot in March. So it was a colossal mess. But long story short, it is going to court. It will be resolved. My best prediction is that we will have a redistricting commission decide by the end of September, and then it'll go to the General Assembly. There is a process which we can talk about. If the General Assembly rejects those maps, it could up by the Virginia Supreme Court. And most likely the courts will decide that we will have elections in 21, 22, and 23. But the courts can decide anything we want. Frankly, if we don't have elections this year, we're already out of compliance with the Virginia Constitution. So the question is not if we're acting unconstitutionally, but how much unconstitutional actions we will have. And I hope I've explained all that, because it's kind of confusing, but if anyone has questions, please jump in. Did y'all get all that? Because it's a mess. But if y'all understand it, then that's good. Then you're ahead of 99% of Virginia voters. But it was really not at all. In my view, we could have used American Community Survey data, which is from the census, which is not a, so if the census requires data, the US Census that's constitutionally mandated in the federal Constitution gives us data every 10 years. And it's as perfect as data can be. Data is never perfect, and there's always someone who moves and messes up the data. But generally, to do a census, every single American, if the census succeeds, is sent a questionnaire. Every one of you got one, I got one, you answer it. And so every single American is counted, per person, counted. Now, obviously, it's not perfect. You might miss homeless people, you might miss non-citizens, people move. But the goal is to count each and every one of the 300 odd million of us. Now, in every non-census year, the census does conduct a survey. It's called the American Community Survey, also known as ACS. If you look up right now, if I were to Google the population of the city of Alexandria, it would not give me in Google the 2010 population, because it could give me the census of 2010 population, but if I'm looking for the population of the city of Alexandria, I want to know what it is now. So what it'll give me is the ACS data, which is done annually. It'll probably give me from 2019, maybe even now from 2020, the annual ACS data. ACS data, while not as good as census data, is very, very, very good. It's better than any public poll you've ever seen in your life. So a really good public poll in Virginia, a really extensive, massive public poll, might look at 1,500 Virginians. The ACS data looks at 60,000 Virginians, about 1% of the entire population. So while it's not as good as the census, which looks at 100% of the population, it's far, far better than any poll. I mean, instead of a big plus or minus 3%, you might find plus or minus 0.1%. It's the reason why, if you look at population data, it'll tell you based on the latest ACS survey. My argument is that we should have used that data, frankly, with regard to 2021. And then when we got better data, maybe draw the lines again in 22, 23. But rather than having data that is 10 years wrong, we could have data that is the slight bit of noise between the census and ACS, rather than the massive unfairness that occurs because people in Loudoun are way unrepresented right now, because Loudoun's the fastest growing county in Virginia. It's, grown, I don't know, more than 50% probably in the last 10 years, maybe even higher than that. Could be 60 or 70, while Southwest Virginia counties have decreased in population. So you get to the point where in 2021, you're going to have some delegates represent 150,000 people, 160,000 people, while other delegates represent 80,000 people. Actually, I should say, I was basing it on, let me give you different numbers. If the average district is 80,000, we'll say in Loudoun, someone might represent 140, and in Wise, they might represent 70. So you might have people getting twice as many representatives as another person. And that's because over 10 years, many people have moved to Northern Virginia and left Southwest Virginia. And for one person, one vote, equality under the law, equal protection under the laws, we should have, the lines now. But as I said, no one followed the Constitution and no one listened to me. So here we are.